I promised you a giant crocodile last time, one large enough to make a meal out of the dinosaurs sharing its riverbank, and I want to open with the actual physical proof of that claim, because it's rarer than you'd think. In 2002, researchers examining a hadrosaur tail from the Blufftown Formation in Georgia found something embedded directly in the bone. Puncture marks, deep, curved, and precisely spaced, that match the tooth structure of exactly one known late Cretaceous predator in that ecosystem, and it wasn't a dinosaur. This is Deinosuchus, and depending on which estimate you trust, its bite may have been the single strongest of any animal, dinosaur included, to have ever lived in North America. It ruled the coastlines and rivers of this continent for roughly 8 million years, and for most of that reign, it wasn't hiding from the dinosaurs around it. In large parts of its range, it was eating them. The road to actually understanding what Deinosuchus was took an embarrassingly long time, and it starts, fittingly enough, with a misidentification almost as dramatic as the animal itself. Back in 1858, an American geologist named Ebenezer Emmons described a set of unusually thick, curved teeth with distinctive vertically grooved enamel, recovered from deposits in North Carolina. At the time, giant reptilian teeth like these were most often assumed to belong to marine reptiles, the plesiosaurs and their relatives that dominated the mental image of prehistoric monsters in the mid-1800s. And Emmons's material got filed away under that same general assumption for decades. It would be nearly half a century before anyone connected these eastern seaboard teeth to something bigger and considerably more terrestrial. The real breakthrough came from Montana, not North Carolina. In 1903, the famed fossil hunter John Bell Hatcher recovered substantial skeletal material from the Judith River beds, bones that were unmistakably crocodilian, but on a scale that didn't match anything in the existing record. Hatcher died the following year, in 1904, before he could finish describing what he'd found, and it fell to his colleague at the Carnegie Museum, W.J. Holland, to complete the work. In 1909, Holland formally published the description, creating an entirely new genus to hold it. Deinosuchus, terrible crocodile with the species name Hatcheri, a direct tribute to the man who found it, but didn't live to name it himself. Over the following decades, as more scattered material turned up across the continent, and as researchers gradually recognized that Emmons's old North Carolina teeth and several other regional specimens all belonged to the same broad genus, the picture slowly stitched itself together into something resembling a coherent animal, rather than a scattering of oversized teeth filed under the wrong reptile group. To understand why Deinosuchus fossils kept turning up in such geographically scattered, oddly disconnected pockets, you need to picture what North America actually looked like during the animal's lifetime, because it wasn't one continuous landmass the way it is now. For most of the late Cretaceous, a shallow inland body of water called the Western Interior Seaway sliced the continent almost cleanly in two, running roughly from the Gulf of Mexico up through what's now the Arctic. On the western side sat Laramidia, the narrower strip of land that hosted the dinosaur fauna. Most people picture, immediately when they think Late Cretaceous, Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, the whole familiar cast. On the eastern side sat Appalachia, a separate, considerably less famous landmass, cut off from the western dinosaur communities for millions of years, and consequently home to its own distinct, much more poorly documented set of dinosaurs and other animals. Deinosuchus fossils have turned up on both sides of this old divide, recovered from 12 different U.S. states as well as northern Mexico, and this geographic split is part of the reason paleontologists now recognize more than one species within the genus. Populations from the Texas and northern Mexico region, generally grouped under the name Deinosuchus riograndensis, lived alongside the Laramidian dinosaur community, you already know. But it's the Appalachian populations that make this animal's story genuinely unusual, because eastern North America, as far as the fossil record shows, never developed anything close to a full-sized, tyrannosaur-grade predator of its own. In that ecosystem, there was no equivalent apex land predator competing for the top spot. Deinosuchus simply was the apex predator, arguably the single most dangerous animal in the entire region, without ever having to share that title with a comparably sized dinosaur. Now, about that size, and about how badly the historical estimates swung around before anyone nailed it down. Early 20th century reconstructions, working from fragmentary material, occasionally pushed length estimates into wildly exaggerated territory. Modern analyses, built from more complete skull and skeletal material recovered over the following century, have settled on a somewhat less cartoonish but still genuinely enormous range, with most researchers now placing large adult Deinosuchus somewhere in the 8 to 10 meter range, roughly 26 to 33 feet, with the very largest individuals potentially pushing higher still. For comparison, the largest living crocodilian alive today, the saltwater crocodile, tops out at around 6 to 7 meters in exceptional, well-documented individuals, which makes even a conservative adult Deinosuchus noticeably larger than the biggest predator any human being has ever actually had to worry about in the modern world. And the size wasn't the scariest part of the resume. In 2012, a research team led by Florida State University biologist Gregory Erickson published a study in the journal PLOS One that set out to measure something considerably harder to fake than length estimates from scattered bones, actual bite force. Erickson's team physically tested the bite force and tooth pressure of adult individuals from all 23 living crocodilian species, building a detailed relationship between skull size and biting power across the entire modern family. Then, using that relationship, they extrapolated upward to the skull dimensions known from Deinosuchus material, and the resulting estimate for the largest individuals came out at roughly 23,100 pounds per square inch, or about 102,750 newtons of bite force. To put that beside something familiar, the strongest bite ever directly measured in a living animal, from a large captive saltwater crocodile, comes in at a little over 16,000 newtons. Estimates for the bite force of an adult Tyrannosaurus rex, depending on which biomechanical study you consult, tend to land somewhere in the range of 35,000 to 57,000 newtons. Even using the more conservative end of Erickson's estimate, Deinosuchus's calculated bite plausibly exceeded T-Rex's by a wide margin, and its upper estimate is more than double even the highest T-Rex figures typically cited. It's worth being honest about what a number like this actually is. It's a model built by scaling up from real measurements on living relatives, not a direct reading off a fossil, and there's real uncertainty baked into any estimate that has to reconstruct soft tissue and muscle mass an animal has been missing for around 75 million years. But even accounting for that uncertainty, the range Erickson's team calculated puts Deinosuchus somewhere in the conversation for the single strongest bite of any land animal, extinct or living, that we have any real data on at all. Which brings us back to that 2002 discovery in Georgia, because a bite force number on its own, however impressive, is still just a hypothetical. What turns hypothetical into confirmed is a bite mark actually embedded in the bone of something this animal tried to eat. The Blufftown Formation hadrosaur tail vertebrae carried exactly that, puncture wounds matching the size, spacing, and cross-section of Deinosuchus teeth, and research led by paleontologist David Schwimmer, who has spent much of his career specifically studying this animal's biology, has documented multiple similar cases across the Appalachian fossil record. Some of these bite marks show partial healing, meaning the dinosaur survived the initial attack, at least for a while, evidence of a failed ambush rather than a successful kill, which is itself a small, strangely humanizing detail. Even an animal packing an estimated 100,000 Newton bite didn't win every encounter. And the predation record doesn't stop at herbivorous hadrosaurs. Bite marks consistent with Deinosuchus have also turned up on a tyrannosauroid limb bone, evidence that this crocodilian wasn't restricted to picking off plant eaters. Given the opportunity, it was apparently willing to go after other meat-eating dinosaurs too, which tracks with what we know about how modern crocodilians hunt in the first place. Ambush and ambush alone. A Deinosuchus almost certainly wasn't chasing anything down on land. It was doing what crocodilians have always done, lying motionless at the water's edge, letting a thirsty or careless animal wander within range, and then closing the distance in a single, explosive lunge that a 100,000 Newton bite made very difficult to survive. There's one more piece of Deinosuchus biology worth sitting with, because it changes how you should picture the biggest individuals in this population, and it connects back to something crocodilians and dinosaurs do very differently from each other. Dinosaurs, as we've covered on this channel before, using growth rings preserved in fossilized bone, tend to grow explosively fast during a relatively short adolescent window, and then plateau once they hit adult size. Crocodilians don't really work that way. Living crocodilians grow comparatively slowly, but keep growing, in smaller and smaller increments, for essentially their entire lives, meaning size in a crocodilian population correlates heavily with raw age rather than simply with how quickly an individual matured. If Deinosuchus followed the same basic growth pattern as its living relatives, and everything about its biology suggests it did, then the largest individuals recovered from the fossil record, the ones pushing toward that 10-meter upper range, weren't just well-fed. They were old, genuinely old, likely on the order of decades, survivors that had spent 50 years or more, navigating an ecosystem that included Tyrannosaurs on one coastline, and, quite possibly, other Deinosuchus on the same riverbank. Every meter of extra length on the biggest specimens paleontologists have found represents that much more accumulated time spent successfully not dying, in a world that was actively trying to kill it from more directions than almost any other animal in the fossil record. And then, with all of that going for it, roughly 8 million years or so before the asteroid that ends most people's mental timeline of the Cretaceous, Deinosuchus simply disappears from the fossil record. It didn't go out in the same catastrophic, world-ending event that took the non-avian dinosaurs. It was already gone, for reasons that still aren't fully settled, well before that day arrived. The leading explanations point toward the slow retreat and reshuffling of the Western Interior Seaway itself, the very coastal and estuarine habitats. Deinosuchus specialized in shifting and shrinking as sea levels changed, potentially squeezing an ambush predator this specialized out of the ecological niche it had dominated for so long. It's an oddly quiet ending for an animal that spent 8 million years as one of the strongest bites on the continent, gone before the meteor most people associate with the end of the dinosaurs had even entered the picture, the apex predator of an entire coastline written out of the story, before the story's most famous chapter had even started. So here's where this one lands. An animal first identified from a handful of teeth that got filed under completely the wrong reptile group for nearly 50 years, eventually named for a fossil hunter who died before he ever got to see it published. That turned out to be the single deadliest predator on an entire side of prehistoric North America, strong enough by some estimates to outbite Tyrannosaurus rex itself, with the tooth-scarred dinosaur bones to prove it was actually using that bite on the animal sharing its riverbank. And it still managed to vanish quietly enough, millions of years before the asteroid, that most people have never even heard its name. Alright, staying on brand for a second, Claw Catalog exists because these mysteries keep turning up in the most unexpected corners of an animal's biology. And next time, we're leaving the water behind entirely. I'm taking you to Mongolia and North America's grasslands for one of the strangest apex predators mammals ever produced. A skull the length of a horse's and a bite to match, belonging to an animal that isn't even in the same order as a wolf, a bear, or a big cat, Andrewsarchus. Let me know in the comments which prehistoric predator's bite force you'd want ranked against Deinosuchus. And subscribe so you're here when we get to it.